In every corner of the world, where hope seems a distant luxury, resides an ancestral, silent, and unbreakable force. It is the force that pulses in a mother's heart, capable of transforming the deepest pain into a legacy of resilience. In Atlanta, under a sky that has witnessed so many injustices, the story of Tasha Brooks unfolded, not as a lament, but as a hymn to survival. A testament that even in the most arid asphalt, a seed can germinate and flourish. Even before the first rays of sun dared to touch the aged rooftops of West Atlanta, Tasha's eyes were already open. It was not a choice, but an imposition of life, for time had never been her ally. In that two-bedroom house, where the ceiling plaster showed cracks like scars and the refrigerator roared louder than a train, the silence of dawn offered the only refuge for her soul. It was the moment she could breathe, alone with her thoughts, before the day's whirlwind swallowed her again. Tasha Brooks, a 37-year-old black woman, carried on her face the wisdom of decades more than her actual age. Her skin, with the deep hue of sun-scorched oak, and her hair, always contained in an old turban, hid both fatigue and the burdens she could not share. Her hands, firm and calloused from hard work, scrubbing floors, carrying heavy market bags, hugging her children in moments of despair, were the map of her journey. They told the story of a woman who, with every touch, reminded her boys that kindness still existed in the world. Barefoot, she walked through the house still immersed in darkness, skillfully dodging scattered toys and leaning school bags. A quick check of the light box brought a brief relief. The power was still on. But the truce was ephemeral, for the final eviction notice was approaching, a sword suspended over their heads. Tasha knew that the battle for housing was constant, a daily struggle against a system that seemed to conspire to keep them marginalized. At the foot of the worn mattress, Isaiah, the youngest at 7, slept soundly. Thin and small for his age, he had large, sweet eyes and the peculiar habit of leaving his feet outside the covers. Elijah, the middle son, rested on the sofa, a notebook still in his lap and a pencil between his fingers. He had always been a dreamer, expressing himself through drawings, the only one of the three who still dared to dream big, even when reality threatened to crush his aspirations. Tasha covered them with silent affection, and then her gaze turned to the locked room. There, isolated in his own world of pain, was Malik, the eldest. Since the violent death of his father Darnell by the hands of the police, Malik had transformed. Tasha felt that her son's smile had been buried along with the coffin. He barely spoke, and when he did, his voice carried a weight, a harshness that frightened her. She recognized that path, for she had seen other boys follow it, and many never returned. Malik's anger was a dangerous flame, and Tasha would do everything to prevent her firstborn from getting lost. That morning, like so many others, Tasha knelt by the sink, murmuring a prayer. She did not ask for riches, nor for rest. Her plea was for strength. Strength to keep her children alive, to protect them from the anger that consumed Malik, to face another day. For her, loving was never a passive feeling. It was work. It was struggle. It was the very essence of survival. And Tasha was ready to fight, not only for her children, but for a future where dignity was not a privilege, but a right. She knew the journey would be long and arduous, but the seed of hope, planted in her heart, propelled her forward, step by step, against all odds. Atlanta, with its streets and alleys, had never been a kind place for men like Darnell Brooks. He was a pillar of strength, tall and robust, with broad shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of the world from an early age, both physical and symbolic. Darnell worked as a construction painter, his loose pants always stained with paint, and his backpack, a faithful companion, held the simple lunch Tasha lovingly prepared. He was a man of few words, but his laughter was easy and contagious. He used to say that his children would be greater than him, and that, for him, was all that mattered. For Malik, Darnell was a clear mirror, a reflection of everything he aspired to be. The love between father and son there needed no words, only presence, a mutual understanding that transcended the verbal. On that fateful morning, when the world of Tasha and her children collapsed, Malik was only 11 years old. He was sitting on the porch, anticipation shining in his eyes, waiting for his father to arrive. It was a Friday, and Darnell, true to his routine, always brought a small bag of sweets for the three brothers. However, that afternoon, the footsteps echoing down the street were not Darnell's. Sirens tore through the silence, screams followed, and confusion filled the air. And then the blood flowing down the sidewalk, a vivid stain that Atlanta, in its indifference, didn't even bother to clean. The police, in their version of events, claimed it was a routine operation, that a suspect was fleeing. Darnell, with his paint-stained clothes and red cap, was mistaken. They said he ran, but Tasha knew, with the certainty that only love and intimacy can give, that he would never run. Not with the still warm lunch in his backpack, not after a full day of hard work. There were 3 shots, a dry report, devoid of emotion, no arrests, just excuses disguised in silence, a veil of impunity that covered the truth. Malik was there. He saw. And what broke inside him was not just the image of his father lying on the ground. It was the laughter of the police officers, a cruel sound that echoed in his mind. It was Darnell's body, left there for hours, while curious onlookers took photos, turning tragedy into a spectacle. That day marked Malik in a way Tasha could never have foreseen. After that day, Tasha could never again touch the room she and Darnell shared. She spent sleepless nights, her sleep stolen by the sound of Malik's footsteps through the house. He stopped going to school for a while. His passion for drawing abandoned. The games with Elijah and Isaiah ceased. He started going out later, his fists clenched, his eyes hardened, reflecting an anger that Tasha feared. She tried to talk to him, but he only replied that everything was fine, a lie she knew to be painfully false. It was as if Malik had embarked on a thorny road, and each of his silences was a new cut in her soul. Elijah, with his keen sensitivity, tried to distract his brother with drawings, but received only a vague nod in response. Isaiah, in his childish innocence, asked where his father was, and Malik, with a harsh voice, replied that the world didn't care. Tasha perceived the growing abyss between them, but her determination was unshakable. She began to look for ways to occupy Malik's time, forcing the school to take him back, seeking a community psychologist who, although having limited hours, was the only option available. And above all, she spoke. She did not preach, she did not yell, she just spoke, her voice laden with love and concern. She said that burying Darnell once was already too much, that she wouldn't lose another man from the house. She affirmed that Malik could feel anger, yes, but that this anger could not be a pretext to repeat the injustice. She explained that justice was not revenge, but the construction of a future. Malik listened. Sometimes he pretended not to, but deep down, he listened. His mother's words, like seeds planted in arid soil, began to germinate, slowly, but with the promise of a new life. The yellow notice, coldly affixed to the door like a verdict, announced, "Notice to vacate." 3 words Tasha had read before, but which never failed to pierce her soul. The rent was 2 months overdue, a heavy burden added to the practically empty refrigerator, where only a liter of milk, 2 apples, and a pot of rice and beans made 2 days prior remained. Elijah, in a gesture of love and sacrifice that broke Tasha's heart, had been offering his school lunch to his younger brother for weeks. Isaiah, in his innocence, thanked him with a smile, but Tasha saw the veiled hunger in his eyes, a painful contrast to the sweetness of his gratitude. It was February, and Atlanta's biting cold spared no one, not even the heart. The house they lived in, with its stuck windows and cracks that seemed to invite the freezing wind, became a trap. Tasha, in a desperate effort to contain the icy air, stuffed blankets into the cracks. The gas had been cut off, and dinner was improvised on a second-hand electric stove that sometimes gave shocks, a constant reminder of the precariousness in which they lived. In those days, Tasha cleaned large houses in Buckhead, on the other side of the city. She took 2 buses, a train, and returned at night, her hands smelling of cleaning products and her feet aching. Some employers treated her as invisible, others as a threat. And yet, she smiled, because she needed the money. Sometimes the payment barely covered the return fare, and she walked long stretches on foot, with the constant fear of being approached by the police, simply for existing, for being a black woman in a neighborhood that didn't want her. At school, Malik had returned to classes, but remained distant, avoiding teachers and sitting at the back of the room with headphones that played no music, an invisible shield against the world. The school, accustomed to similar cases, offered little beyond notes on his report card, unable to penetrate the barrier Malik had erected around himself. Elijah, the silent observer, noticed everything. He wrote, drew, absorbed every detail. He knew how many times his mother cried in the bathroom, even when she tried to hide her pain. Once, he sketched a drawing of their house where the cracks in the walls transformed into roots, as if the house, despite everything, struggled to cling to the earth. Tasha saw the drawing, and sitting at the table, cried softly, tears streaming down her tired face. "I won't let this house fall," she whispered to herself that night, as if making a pact with the bricks themselves, an unwavering promise that she would not yield. It was then that she began selling homemade cakes on Sundays, knocking door to door in quieter neighborhoods. Isaiah, with his childlike energy, helped carry the bag. People bought, perhaps more out of pity than appreciation, but Tasha was grateful for every penny, using it to keep the lights on, the water running, and rice on the plate. She had always been an honest person, and this honesty extended to how she dealt with her children. She told them, with the frankness that only a deeply loving mother can have, that they were poor, that the things they saw on the internet and television, the expensive toys and clothes, would not be for them. This harshness, this dose of reality hurt her, for she wished she could give them a life of abundance. But the only thing she could offer was a life of integrity, a legacy of values that her own parents had passed down to her. One of those days, Isaiah, with his large, curious eyes, asked his mother if they could have a dog. Tasha, with a sigh that carried the weight of her worries, explained that there was no money for a pet, that every penny was counted for basic needs. The disappointment on the boy's face was palpable, but Tasha knew that the truth, however harsh, was the best path. She wanted her children to understand reality so they could fight for a different future. One evening, seeing Malik returning earlier than usual, Tasha tried not to show surprise. He went straight to his room, but before closing the door, he murmured, almost inaudibly, "Do you want help with the cakes on Sunday?" She didn't answer immediately, just nodded. But inside her heart beat with renewed strength, as if the world, at last, had started to turn a little more right. The house still trembled with every strong wind. The bills still piled up in the kitchen drawer. But there was something in the air, a crack through which hope, stubborn and resilient, began to pass, illuminating the path ahead. In early March, a subtle but profound change began to manifest in Malik. He started leaving home later and later, and it was no longer just the hardened gaze or the monosyllabic voice that worried Tasha. It was the loaded silence, a palpable tension that hung over him, like a bomb about to explode. The black cap, the always hidden backpack, the smell of cheap cigarette smoke clinging to his hoodie, everything pointed to a dangerous path. And worse, his eyes, though they didn't avert when someone spoke to him, didn't truly listen either. He was heading to a place Tasha knew all too well, even without ever having set foot there, a place of disillusionment and violence. That week, a neighbor, her voice laden with concern, discreetly called Tasha to warn her. Malik had been seen with the group known in the neighborhood, young men with bitter eyes who flaunted expensive cell phones but lived in broken homes. It was not a novelty in those streets,
but the pain of seeing her own son among them was excruciating. Tasha felt her heart tighten, a dark premonition hanging over her soul. That night, Tasha waited on the porch. The cold of the asphalt rose through her feet, but she didn't move. When Malik finally arrived, it was past midnight. He watched her from afar, expecting shouts, reprimands, but found only her gaze. A gaze that carried the history of everything she had already lost, and the unwavering determination of everything she still refused to surrender. She didn't ask where he had been. She just said, her voice firm but laden with deep pain, that she was her son, that she was not a product of that street, and that she would not allow the city to swallow him, as it had swallowed his father. Malik turned his face, his eyes moist, but he wouldn't let her see his tears. He replied, almost in a whisper, that he could not bear to be the boy who cried anymore, that everyone expected him to endure, that he could not be weak. Then Tasha slowly stood up, walked to him, and placed her hand on her son's shoulder. She said that weakness was not crying, that weakness was letting pain turn into hatred, and that he could choose. Perhaps for the first time in his life, he could choose his own path. 2 days later, Malik didn't show up at school. The principal called, informing that he had been caught outside talking to an older man known to the police. Tasha went to pick him up. There were no shouts, no reprimands, just her gaze fixed on his eyes during the entire ride home. And when they arrived, she locked the door, asked the other 2 children to stay in their room, and sat Malik at the table. It was there that she poured out everything that was in her heart. She told him how much Darnell dreamed of him, that how Malik had always been the son who most resembled his father in his gestures, his walk, even his breathing. She confessed her fear, a real and overwhelming fear. She said that every time he left, she already rehearsed a speech for his funeral, that she had even chosen the clothes he would wear, because she didn't want to see her son's body unprepared. Tasha didn't cry as she spoke, but Malik did. He kicked the chair away, hit the wall with his hands, expressing his exhaustion, his frustration, his feeling that no one ever listened to him, that everything about him seemed threatening to others, even when he just wanted to exist. And Tasha, her voice low but firm, replied that the only way to overcome it was by surviving. Surviving, she stated, was the most radical act a black man could commit. Malik left home that night. He stayed out until sunrise and returned with a swollen face, red eyes, but with a decision in his heart. He said nothing. He just picked up the dusty school notebook from the shelf, tore out the old pages, and started a new chapter in his life, driven by her mother's unwavering strength.
Years slipped away like the wind blowing against one's face, harsh, cold, yet constant, relentless in their advance. Tasha knew no rest. No blessing was granted to her without a cost, no progress without the weight of exhaustion. But, step by step, like one walking barefoot over incandescent embers, she built something solid amidst the void, a structure of resilience that defied the logic of precariousness. The cleaning, once sporadic work, became a fixed service, then 2, and finally 3. Tasha, with her unwavering determination, honed her culinary skills, learning to make even tastier sweets. She acquired an old but functional sewing machine and began mending other people's clothes, ensuring for a time that all bills were paid. The refrigerator, once a symbol of scarcity, regained its color, filled with fruits that Isaiah, with almost surgical precision, learned to cut. The gas, which had once been cut off, returned, and the house, once a precarious shelter, stopped leaking. And even without the luxury that society so valued, there was dignity. A dignity built with the palm of her hand and the sole of her foot, with the sweat and persistence of a woman who refused to be broken. Malik, driven by his mother's silent strength, finished high school with regular grades, but an unexpected letter of recommendation from a teacher who saw something beyond the surface in him opened the doors to a technical course. It was there that he discovered law, an area that fascinated him. He expressed a desire to defend those whom no one defends, a phrase that, though spoken with simplicity, made Tasha cry in the bathroom for hours that day, tears of relief and pride streaming down her face. She saw there the seed of justice, planted in a soil of pain, germinating and promising fruit. Elijah, always attentive, always silent, improved his drawings every day. At 14, his interest turned to biology, not just to draw the human body, but to understand its intrinsic functioning. When Isaiah saw his brother with a medical book, he murmured, with the innocence of a child, that he also wanted to learn to fix people. The phrase echoed in Tasha's mind for days, a premonition of a promising future. At that moment, she understood. Her children were looking to the future, and they were looking up, to a horizon of possibilities that she, with her tireless struggle, had opened up for them. Time, though relentless, did not heal all wounds. Malik still woke up startled, at times, haunted by memories. Elijah still wrote sad poems that he never showed anyone, keeping his pain a secret. Isaiah still asked why his father died that way, a question that, though painful, no longer stemmed from despair, but the desire to understand, to move forward, to transform tragedy into learning. Gradually, the house, once crooked, once a symbol of precariousness, transformed into a firm shelter, a safe haven where the family could rebuild. The root planted in the asphalt, crooked and resilient, grew like a street tree, with no room to expand, but with an unyielding will to exist, to resist, to prosper against all odds. The graduation day arrived not as a singular event, but as a dream materializing 3 times, a testament to a mother's persistence and unconditional love. Malik, imposing in his dark suit and navy blue tie, walked onto the stage with a contained smile, but his steps were firm, and the diploma in his hands trembled, not from nervousness, but from deep emotion. Lawyer. He sought his mother's gaze in the audience and found her with her hands clasped in her lap, as if holding the world in her palms, a gesture of strength and gratitude that transcended words. Years later, it was Elijah and Isaiah's turn to graduate. 2 black men, now graduated in medicine and veterinary medicine respectively, crossed the stage to warm applause. 2 boys who once slept hungry, but who grew with purpose, driven by their mother's vision. Tasha, wearing a light green dress, without embroidery or glitter, but with the intrinsic elegance of a woman who knows her worth, sat in the front row. Her silence at that moment spoke more than any shout, as she watched her sons, seeing the impossible bow before the hope she had cultivated with such care. Isaiah, the youngest, was the last to walk onto the stage. As he descended, he took the diploma from his folder and, in a gesture of profound reverence, knelt before his mother. With tear-filled eyes, he handed the paper to her, as one offers a medal of honor. "This is yours, Mom," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. Tasha did not respond with words. She merely touched her son's face with the same hand that had washed bathrooms, glued shoes, and distributed unconditional love. And then she smiled, a full, long, liberating smile, expressing the fullness of her journey, the victory of her struggle. Tasha Brooks never made headlines. Her name never appeared on award lists. But in her silent and tireless journey, she saved 3 men from being swallowed by a system that seemed designed to engulf them. She transformed hatred into compassion, absence into strength, and hunger into a promising future. In the end, the world did not reward her with material luxury, but it presented her with something money could never buy, a legacy. And between the cracks of the concrete, she made a tree grow, whose deep roots and strong branches would extend to future generations, an eternal symbol of hope and resilience.